Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for now the 19th episode of Talking Talent. I am hard to believe that we are almost have done 20 of these. I know we've covered a ton of different topics. I know I've said this before, but the goal is to try to do these once a month. That is my goal for 2025. I don't think we quite met that in 2024 for a number of reasons, but have some cool topics lined up and hopefully some great guests for 2025. So we're going to close the year with something that I'm really interested in. We have a great guest to talk about that with. The holidays are almost here. Hopefully, we'll get this out before the end of the year, and you can listen to this while you have some time over the next few weeks with your families. As always, if you enjoy this episode, love if you could tell your friends about it, coworkers, anyone who can appreciate a good conversation about people and talent and what's going on in the HR world. You can subscribe to this on Spotify, on Apple Music, or you can listen on the Cordia Resources website or the Cherry Beckert website. So a lot of places to get access to this podcast. So I'm really excited about this topic today and my guest, who is Elizabeth Mashakas. Elizabeth, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me and happy holidays.
You too, you too. And we're squeezing this in, recording this on December 23rd. So we're squeezing this in right before hopefully we get some downtime and we can spend some time with our families. So Elizabeth is currently the Senior Vice President of Talent Acquisition at Blue Halo. Blue Halo is an innovative manufacturer that's transforming the future of global defense. Now, I did take some of that from the website. I know that that includes a lot of different things, and Blue Halo is involved in a ton of cool stuff. And I think you'll be able to explain that much better than me. So Elizabeth, how did I do with that description? Anything else you'd like to add there from a high level?
Just a little bit. So we consider ourselves a defense technology company, and we have what are called purpose-built solutions. So we founded Blue Halo honestly to be a protective ring around everything that we care about most in the face of pure conflict. When you think about the products and the services, think about a halo. We do products that put defensive barriers, invisible defensive barriers around locations, individuals, um, any type of war fighting equipment. We're there to make sure that the people that we love the most come home safely. So that's what we're about.
Very good. Yeah, I know it's hard to distill all of that down to just a few words. And I've had the privilege to work with Blue Halo in the past and see the growth and all the changes. So I know a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple things today. The topic that if I can give a quick introduction on why I thought this was important. I think a topic that's vastly underrated and underappreciated in the HR and talent world. Something that I first learned about when I saw Joey Coleman, who is an author, does a number of different things, but wrote a great book called Never Lose an Employee Again, which goes through really the experience of many different facets in the employee experience, starting all the way from when an employee is being recruited into your company. So it goes through all these different phases. And the part of it that, I knew about a lot of those, and I've seen people speak about a lot of parts of that entire process. I'd really recommend that book to anyone who has interest in candidate experience, employee engagement, and how to improve that. The specific topic that we're going to discuss today deals with what he calls the the uh, the affirm phase. So AFFIRM, the affirmation phase of the employee experience. This is the critical time between when an employee or then a candidate accepts or signs a job offer and then their first day of work. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's something that I think is missed when you hear presenters and you read articles about there's the recruiting process and then there's the onboarding process, and there's this whole time in between that things can get lost. So Elizabeth, from from a macro level, tell us about your experience with this over your career, and then also how does Blue Halo in your current world differentiate itself in this regard?
This is an area that I have actually found to be a true differentiator between companies. And it's actually one area within the process that's not done well. And it's not because no one cares. It's because it's the gray area, as already kind of described. The problem is the hiring process is done. The recruiters have gotten the assigned offer letter, but they're not an employee yet. So who takes care of them? And I will tell you, often no one. So Blue Halo, we've decided to look at that as a key component and a differentiator in our employees' life cycle. So within my company, I have carved out a specific role, and we call them our program resource managers or staffing managers. And these are people on my team who do nothing but keep those individuals warm while they are waiting to join the company. So, you and I had spoken a little bit about this, and you'd asked me a little bit about, well, you know, is it better in TA or is it better in HR? And I don't think either is better. And I think it's often best when both are involved. Because most companies can't carve out a a pool of people who do nothing but this skill. It's a shared responsibility. It should be a shared responsibility. So, think about what happens. Most people give 2 weeks notice, and most people start within 2 weeks. Even that 2 weeks, though, a lot can happen. Candidates fall out all the time. So, what we do within talent acquisition, regardless of where I've been, is I always say to the recruiters, hey, put a tickler, a reminder on your calendar that you've got folks starting certain dates. Touch base with them the second week of before they start, just to make sure they've gotten everything they've received. Typically HR is already in contact doing a lot of that, what I call the pre-onboarding paperwork. And IT is often in touch, but TA during that second week before they start is still the persons that they know, whom they associate with, and they can be the ones to say, hey, did you get what you need? Are you set for Monday? And just by doing that quick email or that quick call, you can make a big difference in that person starting and not starting, and even how their first day goes.
Yeah, there's just so much opportunity for trust to fall by the wayside. You develop this good relationship during an interview process. You meet your hiring manager during the interview process. All of that can go well. You meet other members of your team, and everyone's really busy, right? So if you just leave it to one person who is just a tiny part of their job is to make sure that this candidate who's going to become an employee has everything they need, and not just, as you mentioned, not just making sure they can log into their computer and that they fill out their I-9 form and their W-4, but making sure that that really when they walk in the door day one, that it's not, people aren't then scrambling to just figure out, oh my gosh, and maybe it's a lot of times multiple people, right? In a big company, you have all kinds of different, and so yeah, I love that, and I think, is there a, you know, in your experience over the years, the actual hiring manager, who again has lots of different responsibilities, and they might be as ready as possible, and they have the right intentions when someone starts day one. What have you recommended for? Is it a case by case basis? Should the hiring manager also be involved during those few weeks?
So, I've thought about this, and I can tell you, hiring managers are already oftentimes overprescribed. And so getting them through sometimes just the hiring process alone is difficult. And again, it's not because they're being difficult, it's because they have full-time jobs. So within that typical 2 week turn period, I would not. They again, many individuals, they are so busy on their projects, their missions. Some, if they're billable, it's even more difficult. When I suggest it, though, is when you've got people who are going to be longer than your traditional 2 week period. And this happens. Um, Good examples are relocation. If somebody's relocating, if somebody is finishing a critical project, and they're like, I just want to see this through, give me another 2 weeks. We also have it a lot when people are waiting on bonus payouts, right?
Yeah,
And then I'd say that the last one would be people with that clearance crossover. That is when a hiring manager has the biggest impact, because as much as the candidate, now soon to be employee, loves the company, I'll tell you what's typically drawn them is the work, the projects. And we can only speak just so much to that. So on occasion, having the hiring manager, when it's an extended period of time, reach out and say, hey, we're super excited about your starting the XYZ project. We're now rounding, this point. Just to give them kind of that update that I interviewed with you, now 4 weeks ago. Hiring manager can now let that person know when they start where that project might be, where when they come in to hit the ground running, what part of the process they're going to be in. So things like that. That's when I would recommend engaging the hiring managers.
got it. Yeah, I know it's, I know different size companies in different industries. There's sometimes the ability for uh, large organizations, and I know a Blue Halo. What's the total headcount at Blue Halo right now?
So right now we are at about 2,400.
Okay,
And we have another two acquisitions that will get us to probably just below 4,000 by this time next year, if not sooner. So
got it.
technically, Sam, we're kind of still a mid-sized company in our space. We're not
Yeah,
small, but we're certainly not the size of some of the larger companies.
yeah. Well, in a smaller company, and whether you're in the government contracting world or some other industry, and you're a 200 person, and we can use government contracting as an example because there are some, as you mentioned, specific requirements around clearances and things like that come into play. If it's a smaller organization, less resources, maybe don't have the ability to carve out a role for someone like you're describing. What recommendations can you give to either an HR leader or a talent acquisition leader who's responsible for this in a company that may not have the budget to have a staffing manager that you have?
So honestly, it is such an important time frame, right? Smaller companies, maybe some small companies only bring in 10 people a year. Okay, the HR person, talent acquisition person, wherever it lands, you need to find somebody in the company who has a little bit of bandwidth, whether it's an admin, somebody within the company who can take on the responsibility of just a little bit of that handholding. And again, traditionally it's a 2 week turn. You're not asking for a lot of time out of somebody's day-to-day responsibilities. But for those 10 people onboarding, that personal touch can make all the difference in the world. Again, of them starting or not. I would honestly say that it takes a village. And the smaller you are, the more hats you have to wear. And so to understand that um, maybe it's not one person, right? But it is the collaboration of maybe a company admin with the recruiter, with HR, all making sure that you understand the responsibility and the importance of that outreach, that email, that phone call.
Yeah,
Again, that
and
shared
and and
responsibility.
And in smaller companies too, if even though you're hiring less people, those hires can be so impactful in a small organization where you lose one person who's coming into a really important role, and all of a sudden you're starting that recruiting process all over again. That can really be a detriment and put you back weeks and months. Um, and you mentioned things like relocation and bonuses. We're right now at the time of the year where and whether it's in the Washington, D.C. metro area or other places where, people are accepting job offers at end of December, or I'm sorry, end of November, early December. They're not starting until after the holidays, January, mid-January, which is just the world we live in, right? Sometimes you
That
don't want
is.
somebody to onboard and then be there for a week and then all of a sudden not have much connection with their team for weeks. So it's I think it's even more important with the seasonality. Um, Take me back to earlier in your career and how you've gotten to the point where you are now and have been able to implement some of these things at Blue Halo. Any lessons you learned early in your career, and whether that's specific examples or just how did you get to the point where you are now, where you kind of have a very specific vision of how this should work?
So I'll tell you, um, working in some of the largest companies that I have, process is really important. Compliance is really important. The longer I've done this, the more I've come to realize, um, you know, bottom line is we're dealing with people. And we are dealing with people who have choices. Even if they've accepted your offer, they still have choices when it comes to who they work for. Um, what I have learned is that a one size fits all approach does not work best here. That, you mentioned it earlier. Is it really on a case by case basis? Yeah, it is. It really is, with the understanding that people do remember how you made them feel. And so if you take that concept and use what I've said again about getting multiple people, using a little bit of that village approach, especially for small companies, to make sure that that person is affirmed. I think that was the word that was used, that they've made the right decision. And that's those periodic touch points, even if it's one within that 2 week period that's outside of whoever's doing the onboarding. Um, but people do remember how you made them feel, and it does make a huge difference with how they feel about walking into a company then.
Yeah.
So that is one of the true lessons that I've learned, that processes are important, compliance are very important, but we're dealing with people and they have choices. So you need to remember that. You need to remember that with each hire.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I know this isn't something that uh, we talked about last week when we dug into this a little bit, but has anything changed? And this is probably something I should have thought about. Has anything changed in the world we live in now, where you're not seeing, people are getting onboarded virtually, where you have for a number of reasons. A lot of times someone's first day now may not be in an office in front of people. They're having things sent to their home. You're not walking into the office day one and sitting down in your office or your cubicle and having everything there set up for you. You're doing it virtually. Has that been a positive? Has that been a negative? How have you felt that, since COVID's been part of our lives? What now, almost 4.5 years ago? Has that changed at all?
Let's say that it has turned into a positive. Um, Initially, I think everyone was just trying to figure out the new norm, didn't know it was going to be the new norm. So was trying to figure through it and doing the onboarding. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We were bringing people into a brick and mortar site location where you were getting, if you got a badge, where you'd get your badge, where you'd get your IT credentials, you'd be handed your laptop. What ended up happening was this all got shipped. And I can tell you, initially, it wasn't shipped with user-friendly instructions for low-end users.
Yeah.
And we had a couple of folks who, I mean, really took a lot of handholding, because, um, you can be a highly technical person, but there are certain things that you may not be that familiar or comfortable with. You can build a spacecraft, but you might not be able to set up your home office, laptop and printer. Just saying. It's possible. And that's something that people didn't take into consideration. Oh my God, we're hiring a highly technical person. Just send it to them. They'll figure it out. That's not the right approach. And
Yeah.
I think after a couple of, hey, they'll figure it out, and having them say, that wasn't the easiest onboarding. I really struggled. I couldn't figure out how to do this. I wasn't sure if this was going to come to me. Did I have to purchase it on my own? Did I expense this? After a couple of those discussions and lessons learned, we got better at it real quick. And that
Yeah.
included my IT department with the most rudimentary, basic set of instructions that were taped to just about everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the cost of it, you know these numbers way better than I do, but the cost of the cost of hiring a new employee as opposed to the cost of keeping somebody, and that probably goes with the in this affirm phase and during the onboarding process where if you're taking all of the precautions and putting money in the budget to get all this stuff done up front as opposed to being proactive as opposed to being reactive. And someone starts day one, all of a sudden the hiring manager is reaching out to them and saying, "Hey, this is great. I want you to jump into this meeting at 4 o'clock." And they say, "I can't even log onto my computer yet." There's immediate disconnect. And of course, there's nothing, there are always things that aren't going to go perfectly smoothly, but you should have all the resources you should possibly need and feel like when you turn on your computer there day one, even if your first meeting's a video call, that you have everything you need and that you have somebody to reach out to. And part of this book and part of Joey Coleman's writing in this book was once an employee gets past those 90 days, that those are the critical days, and there's different checkpoints within those 90 days. But once someone is there for 90 days and feels like that they have everything that they need, that the company cares about them and vice versa, that there's trust built, that the person's going to stay, has a much longer chance of staying once they get past those 90 days. So there's so much we could dig into, but I think that's that where you put your resources and the more proactive spending of resources as opposed to then reactive, which includes backfilling the role and recruiting. So
It goes back to what I said about people do remember how you made them feel, how they felt. Did they feel valued? Did they feel as though the company was ready for them? Did you have everything ready for me so that I could hit the ground running? It sets a tone, whether intentional or not. It sets a tone for employees as to whether or not they feel like this is going to be their longer term or forever potential forever home, or if this was such a interesting onboarding experience that we're just going to wait and see. You don't
yeah,
want to have these highly valued, highly coveted people that were very hard to find start after, day one or day two and with this is interesting. Let's wait and see how this goes. Because
yeah,
again, these folks have choices and they know it.
yeah, yeah. It's constantly, I don't know if selling is always the right word, but you're even as, you know, it's great. Someone signed an offer letter, they have a start date. There's so much that can happen in those few weeks, but you're continually still selling to them that this is a place that they want to come work, and you're still doing that as they start and they're a new hire. There's that reciprocate. Obviously, there's some reciprocation. It goes both ways, but through the interview process, they're selling to you their skills and why they'd be a good fit, and vice versa. I've worked with clients in the past that are kind of don't feel like they need to go above and beyond to talk about why their organization is a great place to work and that it should sell itself. And it's a whole nother probably hour. We could talk about that process, but that usually then feeds into the same challenges. If you do get somebody to come on board, they do sign an offer letter, they're about to start, and there's not the communication that they need, and the company just thinks, well, we are a great place to work. I'm smart. This person should want to come work for me. I'm going to help them. Unfortunately, it doesn't usually end up being a positive experience.
And there are those companies that also know that their name, their brand equity is so strong that they know that regardless of the experience, people are still going to want to have that brand name on a resume. Um, which doesn't, again, I think there's been in the past a heavier reliance on that. Again, what they have found, even these companies that seem to not focus so much on it, that it does matter. It really does matter. The cost of replacing retention is a huge burden, not just from a cost standpoint, but from a consistency, a knowledge data, retaining the knowledge, if they have internal, external customers, if you have a mission that you are working against, product development, it all matters. And, you know, I think in my case, I'm lucky that some of these other companies have taken a little bit longer to recognize that because again, as I stated at the start of this has been for me, my company's differentiator. It has made a world of difference. We have had an acceptance rate of 97%, and I can't tell you that I've lost anyone, maybe one or two, since we have put this type of role in place.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't help the ones that you still lose. There are very valid personal reasons, why people don't join companies, and that's okay. I can guarantee you, though, that those people are still people who would refer people into my company, who would, open up their network to us. We know that we treated them right. We know how we made them feel. And it was, again, it was such a positive experience, regardless of whether they actually started with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if they don't, they remember that 2 years down the line, 3, 4 years down the line, if something happens, they're looking for a job again, they were, people remember that, and they may not reciprocate it in the moment, but they remember that. As much as you could share, have you ever had, is there a negative experience you had earlier on in your career, something that happened where you realized that you were excited about a job, and maybe you did start that job, but you realized that there were some processes that were broken, or something maybe you accepted a job offer, or got close to and realized something didn't quite feel right. And did any negative experience you had previously in your career lend itself to how you have kind of handled this in the future?
Yeah. So, setting aside the times when I had been acquired, right? And that might not have been what you picked, right? But setting that aside, there was once in my career where um, I was actively interviewing, and I picked a company, and I knew that the company um, structure was very different than what I was accustomed to. The product services were vastly different than what I was used to. And I thought, you know what, let's get well rounded and let's, really, um, because it was, how do I say this? It was a lower end products, lower end services. They treated us that way during the orientation. It felt different, even though I was going in as an executive, which I also went in with a certain expectation as to how I was going to be treated. And it was a it was a bad recruiting experience. And I remember thinking, the person who I was going to report into said, "You'll have the opportunity to fix all of this." It was a terrible recruiting experience, and the onboarding was even worse. I walked out that first day. I actually cried. I cried. And I kept saying to myself, I almost wish this was just like a 1 day class I had gone to. Like, I have to come into this building every single day now and figure out how to make this work. Um, it, it was just the culture was different. Where um, where I had been previously, the people mattered significantly. In the culture that I had joined, I didn't ask the right questions. I assumed that people had that same level of importance, but people were very replaceable because it was very high volume work with very high turnover. So they didn't invest in their people like some of the companies I'd worked in the past where there were very few people in the entire world that had these skill sets. Um, Not that it was right or wrong. It was for me something I wasn't accustomed to. And I did learn a lot while I was there, um, but I didn't ask the right questions during the recruiting process. I got swayed by the flattery of the offer versus really delving into, is it the right culture for me where I'm going to do my best work? So I don't know if that
Yeah.
gives you an understanding, but
No, absolutely. I think I was thinking about it as you were talking, and I 100% in my 20s, early 30s, it's at not asking the right questions and not, whether one, because you don't want to know the answer because you might think it's not going to be a positive one. Or if you ask the question that you just feel like you're probably not going to get the full answer, and you're going to get a rosier picture of what's happening than what's actually happening. 100%. And then so when I'm talking to candidates, sometimes those people who are earlier in their career and haven't gone through, especially if they've come out of school, they've worked for the same organization for 4 or 5 years, they haven't really been in the job market interviewing, especially now virtually like this a lot, as opposed to meeting with people in person. Um, I know when I talk to them or prepare them for an interview, I'll say, I have some questions I think you could ask, but what are you thinking about? Because it's really important, and the questions should seem, should seem genuine, and they want you to ask questions. Most companies do want you to ask questions. So yeah, it is. Yeah, it's challenging, but I think everyone probably has multiple stories about mistakes they made, or how that shaped what they've done in the future. And it's just an ongoing thing that you learn about yourself, and it takes lots of work.
is. And I think for me, when I said, I really remember walking out, sitting in my car and crying. Now, the reason I did that is because, there are times in your career where, there are things that you can impact and influence and change, and things that you can't. And the culture of this company was so deeply ingrained because of the work and what they did. It's not that they didn't care for their employees, they did, but um, it wasn't to the same extent that I had been used to. And I had to wrap my brain around a whole new approach of, again, in my world, people really matter. How you treat them really matters. So that was for me. It was a big change. It was a big shift in understanding that, well, they're used to 30, 40, 50% attrition.
Yeah,
When I'd come from an industry where if we had 5%, it was considered disastrous. And it was just a different culture. And it wasn't right
yeah,
or wrong. It was just different.
yeah. Yeah, and for those listening, and those of you who, whether you work for a company that's bigger than Blue Halo, smaller in a different industry, having the confidence to go to leadership and being able to take information about this. One, I would recommend to read the book and take some of the data in there. I could go into some of the numbers that he uses, but just to bring this up, to get this on the agenda to talk to leadership about as you go into, at this point into 2025. And even if that saves a couple of these new hires that are going to be really impactful for your organization, it's worth it. And it can take some time to put something like this together, and it's certainly there's some resources and costs to go into it, but it's better to be proactive about it than reactive. Um, but thank you for your time, Elizabeth. I know we could probably talk about this forever, but I'm going to let you go and hopefully get on with your holidays, and the next couple of days goes smoothly in between now and the end of the year.
Well, thank you, Sam. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today about this. And you're right, we could probably talk for a very, very long time. Um, it is worth investing in. Our people are very important. As you said, large, small, each new hire that comes on can be a needle mover. And it's important that we treat them that way before they come on board, after they've accepted. So,
Well, thank you. Appreciate everyone listening, and have a good rest of the year. Happy New Year, and we'll catch you in 2025.